Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of the hour. A US judge blocks the deportation of Rumsia Öztürk, a Turkish student at Tufts University, according to her lawyers. The decision is filed at a federal appeals court after her arrest during a crackdown on pro-Palestinian activists. Hong Kong leader John Lee praises the 20-year sentence given to pro-democracy media tycoon Jimmy Lai, calling his crimes severe. The United States, United Kingdom and the United Nations condemn the jailing as unjust and urge his release on humanitarian grounds. Jeffrey Epstein associate Ghislaine Maxwell appears virtually from a Texas prison and refuses to answer the U.S. House Oversight Committee. Chair James Comer says she invokes the Fifth Amendment, blocking questions on Epstein and possible co-conspirators. US President Donald Trump opposes Israel's annexation of the occupied West Bank as international criticism grows. The White House says a stable West Bank is key to Israel's security and regional peace. The United States and Armenia have agreed to cooperate on civil nuclear energy, deepening ties. The move follows a US-brokered South Caucasus peace deal, with Washington seeking to draw Yerevan closer. The United Nations says it is awaiting clarity on how much of nearly $4 billion in arrears the Trump administration will pay and when. UN Chief Antonio Guterres warns of imminent financial collapse as the US warns it plans a partial payment in the coming weeks. French President Emmanuel Macron says Europe must prepare for further confrontation with the United States. He warns Washington could target the EU over digital rules and tariffs, saying the Trump administration is increasingly hostile to Europe. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu heads to Washington to urge President Trump to expand nuclear talks with Iran as US military pressure builds. Israel wants to curb Iran's enrichment, missiles and regional allies, while Tehran rejects those demands without sanctions relief. We start this hour in Eastern Europe, and power company DTEK says that a Russian attack has damaged an energy facility in Ukraine's southern Odesa region. The company reported that the damage is extensive and repairs will take time. Some settlements in the area were partially left without power. Critical infrastructure is relying on generators while restoration efforts are now underway. Moscow has been targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure since October, leaving millions without power in freezing temperatures. Saul Sadka joins us now. He is a political commentator. He joins us live from Tel Aviv. Saul, thank you so much for joining us here on the program. Moscow, of course, has gone after Ukraine's energy infrastructure, particularly focusing in on these winter months where Ukrainian civilians in particular are facing temperatures below like 10 degrees Celsius, suffering, which leads to them, of course, suffering a near humanitarian crisis. However, their resilience stands firm in this war. What more can you tell us about the consistent barrage that Moscow is launching on Ukraine, especially as the winter comes to an end now?
Well, what we're seeing is the tactics that they've now been using for years. The war that started in February 2022 is about to enter its fifth year. This was supposed to be a three-day march for Putin's troops, and it has ended in a complete catastrophe for him. And what we can see when we look at it is that really, if all they have left, if the final act that they can do is to lob missiles at Ukrainian domestic infrastructure, most likely they're doing that because they don't have any better options. Certainly any other option, any other use of those weapons against military targets would be better for them, but really all they have left is terror weapons. It's unclear how many more years this war can drag on for. And certainly the damage to Ukraine is extreme, but the damage to Russia, its international standing, its soft power, its hard power, its military equipment, and probably in the end, its own unity is going to be much faster.
And Saul, of course, we've seen diplomatic developments over the past few days, of course. Direct talks taking place in Abu Dhabi between Ukraine, Russia and the United States, with envoys all being present at the meeting. We've heard positive statements coming out of all of the sides. However, what we're not really being revealed to about is how those negotiations are going, particularly when it comes to security guarantees, territory, amongst other things. Russia has just come out and says that there's no date now for these next round of talks, which we saw previously announced pretty much straight after the first round. What does this say about the way in which the current ways are going at the negotiating table?
It looks very curious what's going on there, very confusing. But you have to remember that Russia has now put its entire economy on a war footing. A large part of its economy is based on this war continuing. So they have a very large problem, because if the war would actually come to an end, even on their own terms, as long as Ukraine is allowed to continue to fortify its eastern flank, they would then be in a situation where their economy would immediately collapse with the end of the war. The economy is really continuing on vapors at the moment, and those vapors are supplied entirely by the meat grinder on their western border with Ukraine. And as soon as that comes to an end, their economy collapses. So Russia has tied themselves into a knot. So any kind of negotiations that are continuing have to have that in mind. The consideration is that the Russian regime and the elites, if the war comes to an end, even with a settled agreement on terms that are relatively favorable to them, even if that happens, they are in very deep trouble.
Saul Sadka, do stay with us as we turn over to our next story. And we head to some breaking news first. And the Kremlin has stated that no specific date has been decided yet for holding the next rounds of Ukraine peace talks. Kremlin officials say that there have been some contacts made with France, but there are no clear indications that Paris is intended for dialogue at the highest level. However, the Kremlin has taken note of French President Macron's recent statements, where he mentioned that technical discussions are underway to restart talks with his Russian counterpart. The Kremlin says it is always remaining open for dialogue, and the Russian Defense Ministry has shared that its forces have reportedly taken control of Zalezhny in Ukraine's Zaporozhye region. We'll, of course, bring you all the updates coming out of that situation as soon as we get it. We move over to the Gulf next, and the UAE Minister of State, Lana Nuseibeh, visited Tehran on Monday for the second meeting of the Political Consultations Committee with Iran. In a meeting with Iran's Foreign Minister, Sayed Abbas Araghchi, Nuseibeh shared the UAE's commitment to expanding economic and trade relations with Iran, calling their talks constructive. Nuseibeh also welcomed the resumed US-Iran diplomatic engagement in Muscat, stressing her country's focus on regional stability and de-escalation of tensions. Moreover, Araghchi has also reaffirmed the strong relations between the UAE and Iran, expressing Iran's readiness to further enhance bilateral cooperation. Saul Sadka joins us once again. What more can you tell us about this, Saul? Of course, Donald Trump views those Gulf alliances as pretty central to his foreign policy. And now we have seen the United Arab Emirates and the Iranian foreign minister speak, and this will gear up for those talks coming out between the United States and Iran within the next few days. What more can you tell us about these talks, how you think they're going to go, given the current standing?
The UAE has tied its horse to the Abraham Accords alongside Israel, the United States, and various other countries. And I therefore am very dubious. It looks very dubious to imagine that they are going to, in any case, be helping Iran in any real way. But certainly they might be being used by the Americans to bring them to the table. It would be amazing for the Americans if they could get Iran to meet their demands without the requirement for military strikes, because that would mean the Iranian regime would eventually, not immediately, but eventually collapse, because once they have no deterrence, that's the end of them. But the UAE certainly have been a good actor in all these dealings over the past, and I'm sure that will continue.
And so parallel to this, we're seeing a Benjamin Netanyahu visit to Washington. He's said to meet for Donald Trump for the sixth time, the most a foreign leader has met with the president in his second spell in the Oval Office. Does this meeting between Netanyahu and Trump risk souring things between the United States and Iran before things have really matured?
Well, I'm not sure if a seventh meeting between Netanyahu and Trump is going to be what sours the Americans on the Iranians. The Iranians, if you recall, for 47 years now, have been shouting death to America in the streets. So I don't think this is what's going to tip it over in the balance. The Americans have the Iranians at their wing. They are surrounding them with vast military equipment and can pick them apart if that's what they really wanted to. And the Iranians should take note that the Americans and the Israelis seem to be acting in lockstep. And even on occasions when there have been leaks about disagreements between Netanyahu and Trump and so on, those are generally preceded great acts of unity between the two in practice. So any kind of disagreements you might see between Trump and Netanyahu are as likely to be a misdirection to fool Iran into complacency as they are to be any kind of real disagreement. And in the end, it's quite clear that Netanyahu and Trump have a close personal bond. Their bond is not one of political expediency. They are actually friends. So that will make a very big difference, I think, to what's going to happen in the Middle East in the next few months.
However, of course, Donald Trump, at least for now, seems committed to diplomacy when it comes to Iran. Israel, however, has said that it will take matters into its own hands and strike Iran if it crosses its red line when it comes to its ballistic missile program. So obviously the two are on a different page when it comes to this. How do you think that might develop?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I mean, the Americans are totally capable of continuing negotiations with Iran, as they were doing in June and after the 12-day war. They continue the negotiations. They don't control Israel. They certainly can deny their control over Israel if they want to. And so the negotiations will continue, and Israel has the right to defend itself, and had they expressed the intent to do so. And if you recall, around the 31st of January, on Netanyahu's previous visit to the White House, Trump told him in public, in front of the cameras, that Israel should do what it sees fit, and if they want to attack the Iranian ballistic missile programs, if they continue to build them up, they should. And if the Iranians try to restart their nuclear program, then Israel should attack, and I quote, fast. So what we're seeing is really just a kind of a dance where the Americans are using the Israelis as their potential attack dog, perhaps promising to help Iran, ring them in, as kind of a good cop, bad cop game, to offer to protect them if they give the Americans what they want. But really what the Americans want and what the Israelis want is the same thing. It could be, from a cynical perspective, that neither of them particularly care if there's regime change in Iran. But what they do want is they want the nuclear material, whatever remains of it, handed over, the nuclear program permanently closed down, and their ballistic missile program neutered to the extent that it no longer poses a major threat. And also for Iran to stop funding its proxies around the region that have caused so much chaos, destroyed Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, and more. So that's most likely what we expect to happen.
Sol Sadka, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us. It's a great pleasure to speak to you. We'll of course keep our viewers updated on that developing situation when that Trump-Netanyahu meeting comes around and those Iran-US talks commence. We turn over to the US now, and in the latest batch of Jeffrey Epstein files, a photo has emerged showing Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg and Tesla CEO Elon Musk at a lavish dinner party hosted by the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein in 2015. Despite Epstein's 2008 conviction for trafficking minors, Musk and Zuckerberg attended the event, which Epstein himself later described as wild. The guest list also included prominent figures like LinkedIn CEO Reid Hoffman and PayPal's Peter Thiel. However, Musk had previously denied attending any Epstein parties, even calling for the prosecution of those involved in Epstein's crimes. Meanwhile, Kimball Musk, Elon's brother, has clarified his connection to Epstein, stating that the emails between them were due to a newsletter Kimball sent out, not personal meetings. Furthermore, no direct evidence has been found linking any of these tech figures to Epstein's illegal activities. The new revelations come as further questions arise about the relationship Epstein maintained with powerful figures despite his criminal history. Now we turn to East Asia, and China has confirmed that discussions between Chinese and Philippine officials regarding the South China Sea will continue following a recent meeting in Cebu. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian has stated that both sides engaged in frank and in-depth exchanges on maritime issues and other areas of mutual concern. The two nations have agreed to continue their diplomatic dialogue and manage maritime differences effectively through continued communication. China emphasized that the discussions aimed to foster cooperation while addressing sensitive maritime concerns, crucial to maintaining peace and stability in the region. The meeting also underscored the importance of managing maritime situations to avoid escalation and promote stability in the region.
近日，中非外交部官员在菲律宾宿务举行了双边会见，就涉海等共同关心的问题，坦诚深入交换了意见。双方同意继续通过外交渠道保持沟通，妥善处理涉海分歧，管控好海上局势。
We turn over to Africa now, and Ethiopia is hosting a secret camp to train thousands of fighters for the Rapid Support Forces paramilitary group in neighboring country Sudan. The camp constitutes the first direct evidence of Ethiopia's involvement in Sudan's civil war, marking a potentially dangerous development that provides the RSF a substantial supply of fresh soldiers as fighting escalates in Sudan's south. According to reports, Ethiopian government officials said that the United Arab Emirates has financed the camp's construction and provided military trainers and logistical support to the site. Joining us now is Ayanuga Olugbenga Paul, a public affairs analyst, joining us live from Lagos in Nigeria. Thank you so much for joining us. The Sudan war wages on, of course, something that the United Nations calls the worst humanitarian crisis. The UAE has been reported to be backing the paramilitary RSF forces who are fighting against the Sudanese government. If Ethiopia is directly training these RSF fighters, does this cross the line from regional mediators to an active participant in Sudan's war here?
Well, it came as a shock to me too when I saw the news about the training camp in Ethiopia, because I've been trying to look at all the angles and what benefits to what end will it be for Ethiopia to be sponsoring a recognized terrorist organization. I tried to see the connect from the area of ethnic affiliation to the area of investment partnership. that will literally be to the benefit of Ethiopia, because I know nobody does this without, logical reason, and I can't really pinpoint right now. I mean, to the level of my knowledge, why this is happening, and the location of this training camp also gives me a cause for concern. The fact that it is located near the great Renaissance Dam that has been in contention, between the Egyptian and the Sudanese authority on the flow of the River Nile, as it affects both country irrigation systems. So, while on one part, want to think that maybe for the greater dam project politics and related system, this might be the interest of Ethiopia, but I do not see that as being, quality enough reason. So I'm also looking at from the angle of international.
Okay, we seem to be having some network issues with Ayanuga currently. Hopefully we get him back in just a second. These reports that Ethiopia is hosting a secret training camp for fighters of Sudan's RSF forces. They mark a dangerous new phase in Sudan's civil war. Does this... So you're saying, Ayanuga, that the UAE's backing of the RSF forces, which have been said to have perpetrated atrocities across the country, are indeed credible?
Well, I think from all the information available, especially from sources inside Ethiopia itself, it seems there is a level of credibility to the news. And for me, it looks as if, Ethiopia is putting fire on a roof they want to sit under, or they are putting snake under their bed. Because once the RSF forces that they are trained are through with the atrocity they are committing in Sudan, of course, definitely they are going to come back into Ethiopia and give them problems. The same example happened in my own country, Nigeria, here. And if they have not learned from that, I don't know what they would be able to learn from. It sets a dangerous precedent, especially in that volatile region of the, of the continent, where from Sudan to Tanzania to Djibouti to Somaliland, you have these constant wars and insurgency activity happening to Central African Republic. I really feel terrible that, Ethiopia is caught in the finger, and I try to analyze every angle of the cost-benefit analysis of, the gains Ethiopia stands to have, and I can't put it together yet as of now to see why it is worth for them to have a training camp for such a terrorist organization in their country.
Ayanuga, do stay with us as we turn to our next story. And a student at Senegal University has tragically died after violent clashes broke out between police and students who were protesting for delayed stipend payments. The unrest occurred on Monday with Abdul Boya Ba, a second-year medical student who lost his life during the protest. The protests for the timely release of student stipends has been a recurring issue at various Senegalese universities. The Senegal government have confirmed the incident and expressed their condolences to the distressed families. We have some breaking news now, once again coming in from the African continent, and the UN Human Rights Chief has warned that growing tensions in Ethiopia's Tigray region could quickly descend into renewed conflict if urgent action is not taken. Despite a previous peace agreement in 2022, reports of insecurity, human rights abuses and lack of humanitarian access persisted. The UN is calling on all parties to de-escalate immediately, uphold the ceasefire, protect civilians and allow full access to aid, stressing that failure to act now could lead to devastating consequences. Well, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.